Everyone envies me, Walter. 48 years old, owner of the largest chain of supermarkets in the entire city, over 30 prime locations on every busy street. My name is synonymous with trust. Suppliers fight to work with me, competitors respect me, and even the mayor's banquet places me at the head table. Wherever I go, I am the center of attention, surrounded by flattery. But no one knows that at the top of all that glittering success, my heart is achingly empty. My wife, Winnie, I met when I was 20, selling goods from a street stall. She stayed with me through the coldest winter nights and shared a leaky attic with me. We have deep love for each other, but we never had children. We visited countless hospitals, and the diagnosis was always the same: her body was too frail to conceive easily, and I had damaged my health from overwork in my youth. By this age, we had accepted our fate and stopped hoping. Yet during every holiday, seeing other families with children and grandchildren around them, Winnie would quietly slip into the kitchen to wipe away tears. And I could only sit in the vast living room, watching the fire crackle in the hearth, and turn over the memories of 30 years of struggle. My beginnings were no nobler than anyone else's. At 20, I left the countryside for the city with $370 I had saved over 2 years. No education, no connections, no support. My first job was hauling sacks at the docks, my shoulders blistering and scabbing over, again and again. Later, I scraped together enough to set up a stall selling daily goods at the night market. In winter, my fingers would crack and fester from the cold. I huddled behind my cart wrapped in a quilt, guarding the last lamp. In summer, the sun peeled the skin off my shoulders, and I couldn't afford a bottle of water I drank from public restroom taps. Penny by penny, I saved. That tiny 20-square-meter shop grew into 2, then 5, then 10. I survived competitors' price wars, broken cash flows, pandemic shutdowns, and supplier boycotts. Every obstacle, I crashed through with grit and my own flesh and blood. 30 years later, I stood at the top. But the wind at the top is cold. Back in the empty villa, Winnie was already asleep. Out of habit, I walked into my study and opened a photo album. There were no pictures of children, only old snapshots of Winnie and me in our younger days, standing by our cart, our faces red from the cold but beaming with smiles. We were poor then, but we had fire in our hearts and hope for the future. Now, that fire had gone out. The only hope left was to entrust my life's work to someone worthy. I had seen too many rich kids squander fortunes and too many professional managers steal from their companies. I was wary of trusting anyone. Until 6 years ago, when I met Mark at a job fair. It was a rainy day. I didn't have to attend the fair myself, but I felt a sudden urge to see the grassroots market for myself. Holding an umbrella, I walked past row after row of booths, and my eye caught a young man standing in a corner. He was thin, wearing a faded white shirt with frayed cuffs, yet it was ironed neatly. He kept his head down, and his resume was only a few lines long, ignored by everyone. My HR manager leaned in and murmured, "Mr. Bennett, that kid's name is Mark. His parents died young, he was raised by relatives, and he only finished high school. No impressive experience, but he's honest." I walked over, and he looked up. His eyes were so clean it hurt to see them. Timid, eager to please, yet hiding a streak of stubbornness. When he saw my badge, he froze, then bowed deeply, his voice trembling. You're Mr. Bennett. I've seen you in the papers. You're the person I admire most." His tone wasn't flattering, it was genuine reverence, mixed with a touch of humble awe. At that moment, something deep inside me was struck. I saw myself at 20, standing in the cold wind, longing for someone to offer me an umbrella, longing for someone to say, "You can do this." So I said, "Come work for me." He jerked his head up, his eyes instantly reddening, his lips quivering. After a few seconds, he choked out, "Thank you, my savior." That word savior sounded so sincere it warmed my heart. Later I learned that on that day, he had only $20 left, not even enough for a bus ticket home. If no one had hired him, he would have slept under a bridge that night. I brought him back to the company and made him my personal assistant. At first, he was clumsy, spilled drinks, misfiled documents, made typos in meeting minutes. But every time he made a mistake, he would turn pale, bow repeatedly, and offer to have his pay docked. I laughed it off. Everyone starts from zero. I taught him how to read financial statements, how to spot a supplier's hidden markups, and how to negotiate without showing emotion. He learned like a sponge, soaking everything up. And he remembered every kindness. Each time I taught him something new, his eyes would glisten, and he would say, "Sir, you are too good to me. I have nothing to repay you with." 6 months later, he moved out of his shared dorm. Seeing how shabby his place was, I quietly put down the down payment on a nice 2-bedroom apartment in the city center. When he got the keys, he fell to his knees, clutching my legs, sobbing uncontrollably. "Sir, I never had parents. No one ever cared if I lived or died. You made me feel for the first time that I matter to someone. You are my father, my real father." He cried so hard it made my nose sting. I helped him up and patted his back. "All right, this is your home now." Back then, I truly believed. I believed in karma, that kindness would be repaid. I even began to dream after a few more years, when Mark was ready, I would hand over the company, and Winnie and I would travel the world, coming back now and then to see him, to hear him call me father. But I never imagined that beneath that grateful mask lay a venomous snake, cold to the bone. And that snake was already sharpening its fangs, waiting for the first chance to strike. The multi-million-dollar procurement negotiation was set at the city's top business hotel. Walter arrived an hour early, with Mark behind him carrying a thick folder. The suit Mark wore was custom-made by Walter the week before, navy blue, double-breasted, sharply tailored, making his slender frame look more substantial. Before leaving, Mark had adjusted his tie in the mirror repeatedly, his fingers slightly trembling. Walter noticed. "Nervous?" "A little," Mark said with a shy smile. "First time with you at such a big event. I don't want to embarrass you." "You won't," Walter said, patting his shoulder. "Remember, today you don't need to talk, just watch, listen, and take notes. I'll quiz you afterward." Mark nodded firmly, his eyes full of determination. The opponent was the largest daily goods supplier in the north, covering 2/3 of Walter's stores. Their vice president, Heinrich, was in his early 50s, German-born, notoriously tough. Walter had dealt with him for 5 years, knowing he was meticulous, scrutinizing every number and every contract clause. They sat down, tea was served, and after a few pleasantries, Heinrich got straight to business. "Walter, raw materials are up 12% this year, and labor costs are rising too. We have to raise our supply prices by 8%, that's the bottom line." His tone was firm, and his assistant spread out a thick stack of cost breakdowns, dense with data, seemingly flawless. Walter didn't rush to look at them. He took a slow sip of tea, his gaze calmly sweeping over each face across the table, Heinrich's right fingertips tapping the table slightly faster than normal, his usual pressure tactic, his assistant's eyes darting, missing a line when turning the page, revealing that the report wasn't airtight. "Heinrich," Walter set down his cup, his voice steady, "you just installed a new filling line last month, boosting automation by 30%, which actually lowered your labor costs. I acknowledge the raw material increase, but if you factor that out, the net rise is under 4%. Heinrich's fingers stopped tapping. "You showed me the full cost breakdown as a gesture of goodwill, and I appreciate that." Walter leaned forward slightly, pushing the report back. "But let's talk real numbers. I'll offer 4.5%, that's my ceiling. Take it, and we sign a 3-year deal today. If not, I'll talk to Yufeng down south next week. Their quote is lower, but I'm coming to you first out of old loyalty." The room fell silent for 3 seconds. Heinrich stared at Walter, then broke into a grin. "You're still as sharp as ever." He closed his folder. 4.7, no less. 4.6. Deal. Barely 20 minutes had passed. Mark sat beside Walter, barely breathing, his pen hovering over his notebook, not missing a single word. He saw how Walter used an offhand remark to undermine the opponent's momentum, how he used precise data to turn the tables, How he timed the mention of a backup supplier to cap the other side's bargaining room, every move seemingly casual, yet lethal. On the drive back, alone in the car, Walter leaned back in the passenger seat and closed his eyes. "Debrief," he said suddenly. Mark tensed, took a deep breath, and recited, "First, you had already studied Heinrich's public financial reports and knew about his new equipment. Second, you mentioned Yufeng not to scare him, but because you knew they had a quality scandal last week, Heinrich knew that too, so the moment you brought it up, he knew you had inside knowledge. Third." He paused, breaking into a sweat on his forehead. Walter opened one eye and turned to him. Third, Mark bit his lip. "You deliberately arrived 5 minutes late. During those 5 minutes, Heinrich's assistant kept glancing at his watch, growing impatient. When you walked in, he stood up a beat too slowly. He had already lost his first bit of energy just from waiting. You did it on purpose." Walter blinked, then burst out laughing, slapping the seat back, his laughter deepening the wrinkles around his eyes. "Good boy." He sat up, his eyes gleaming with delight. "I thought it would take you at least 3 rounds to figure that out. You passed." Mark lowered his head, a shy smile curling at the corner of his mouth, his voice soft. "You taught me well." Walter looked at his profile. Street lamps flickered past the window, casting warm orange light on Mark's young face, soft features, gentle eyes. A warmth Walter hadn't felt in a long time stirred in his chest, the feeling of a seed he had planted finally breaking through the soil. What he didn't say was that over the years, he had trained more than 20 young people. Some were average, plateauing at middle management. Some were sharp but left after learning a fraction of what he had to offer. Mark was the first with both insight and gratitude. That night, back home, Walter told Winnie every detail of the negotiation. Winnie, knitting on the sofa, smiled. "You really do see him as a son." Walter didn't deny it. He sat beside her and took her hand. "Doesn't he remind you of us when we were young?" Nothing to his name but sheer drive. Winnie was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "He does. But remember the supplier who cheated us out of our first payment? He seemed honest too." Walter's hand paused. "I know," he said, squeezing her palm. "But I'm not so old that I've lost my judgment. I'll test him step by step." Still, the next morning, he had payroll deposit a quarterly bonus into Mark's account, more than Mark's entire previous year's earnings. Mark was in the break room making coffee when he saw the text. He stared at his phone for a long time, then carried his coffee to Walter's office, knocked, walked in without a word, bowed deeply, and when he straightened, his eyes were red. Walter kept his head down, pretending not to notice. "Get back to work. Don't be late for the afternoon meeting." Mark backed out and gently closed the door. In the hallway, he clutched his phone, knuckles white. Only when he reached his own desk did he relax his grip, glanced at the notification, and slowly curved his lips into a smirk a world apart from the teary-eyed young man in the office. Of course he was grateful. Grateful that the old man had so easily, so wholeheartedly, handed him his weakest point. But the expression had to be perfect, red-rimmed eyes, trembling voice, a submissive bow. He had practiced for 2 years, from foster homes to factory assembly lines to Walter's doorstep. He knew better than anyone which kind of meekness earned sympathy, which gratitude disarmed suspicion. He locked his phone, raised his head, and his eyes were once again those of the clean, obedient, grateful Mark. At the end of the hallway, old-timer Tom pushed a cart of inventory past and nodded with a smile. Mark returned a warm smile, stepping aside politely. After Tom was gone, Mark's smile faded. He turned back to his office. On his desk lay a new purchase requisition, only a few $1,000s. Mark picked up his pen and carefully wrote his own name in the approved by column, checked the format, and confirmed there were no errors. This was just the beginning. He opened his notebook and wrote 3 lines on the last page, so lightly they seemed to fear being seen. Year 1, establish footing. Year 2, gain power. Year 3, reap. He tore out the page, shredded it into tiny pieces, and fed them to the shredder. The machine whirred, swallowing all evidence. At the same time, Winnie texted Walter, "Come home early tonight, I made your favorite soup." Walter replied with a cheerful okay, put down his phone, and looked at Mark's quarterly report on his desk. Neat handwriting, clear logic, every figure triple-checked, with extra suggestions on store loss control. Walter read it through, then wrote a big red excellent at the end. He leaned back in his chair, gazing at the city skyline outside. Sunlight bathed the towers in a warm gold. He had never imagined, back when he huddled by his stall in the cold, that he would one day enjoy this, a stable empire, a successor, a secure old age. He closed his eyes and pictured a distant future, old and frail, sitting in a garden, with Mark pushing his wheelchair, handling all company affairs, while he simply watched the sun rise and set, day after peaceful day. What a blessing. He opened his eyes and called HR, give Mark another half-grade promotion. Let him attend next month's strategy meeting as an observer. He hung up, smiling, and returned to his papers. Meanwhile, Mark stood by the shredder for a moment, then turned to the window. The same sunlight fell on his face, but it couldn't reach the cold in his eyes. He pulled out his phone and texted an unlisted number, "Same place this weekend. Good news." He deleted the record, flipped his phone over, and picked up the requisition he had just approved, running his finger lightly over his own name in the approval line as if caressing something destined to be his. Then he stood up, coffee in hand, and walked back to Walter's office, knocking softly and respectfully. "Sir, I've sorted the meeting materials for this afternoon. Would you like to review them now?" Walter looked up and saw Mark in the doorway, backlit by sunlight, his whole figure glowing. Those clear, bright eyes held a gentle smile, his hands holding a folder, his posture humble and proper. "Bring them over," Walter motioned. Mark approached, placed the folder on the desk, and casually topped up Walter's tea as naturally as if he had done it 1,000 times. "Thank you, son." The two words that Walter uttered so offhandedly made Mark's hand pause on the cup handle for a fraction of a second. Then he stepped back and lowered his head. "Don't say that, sir. I should be thanking you." His voice even carried a hint of a choked sob. Walter didn't look up, just waved him away. Mark turned, walked to the door with his usual slight stoop, and only when the heavy oak door closed behind him did he straighten up fully. The hallway lights were cool white. He tilted his head back, closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them, they held a chilly certainty. This game, he would win. And he would win so cleanly that everyone, including Walter himself, would never understand how the young man who kneeled and called him father could have pushed him off the cliff. But Mark knew perfectly well. Because Walter saw him as human. And Mark had long turned himself into a precisely calibrated machine, devoid of emotion. Machines don't feel gratitude or guilt, don't wake in the night remembering a warm bowl of soup or a kind word. Machines only need results. He touched the pen Walter had given him, a limited edition engraved with his initials. Its value alone covered half a year's rent from his previous shared dorm. He rubbed the engraving softly, a faint smile playing on his lips. Then he pocketed the pen, entered his office, sat down in the leather swivel chair, and opened his computer, pulling up a fresh copy of the procurement database. The blue glow of the screen lit up his face. He started copying data row by row, his fingers typing at a steady, unhurried pace like a seasoned chess player, already 30 moves ahead. Outside, the city bustled on. No one knew that the city's largest commercial empire was being slowly strangled from within by a thread as thin as a spider's silk. And the man at the top, right now, was drinking the hot water Mark had refilled, reading Mark's report, and laughing into the phone at his wife. "Make a bit more soup tonight, I'm bringing Mark home for dinner." Winnie hesitated a second on the other end, then agreed, "All right." Walter hung up, flipped through Mark's report again, and when he reached the suggestions section, wrote a note in the margin, "Feasible. Mark takes the lead next week." He closed the folder, satisfied. Outside, the sun was setting, the skyline burning orange. Walter stood at the window, hands in his pockets, gazing at the kingdom he had built with his bare hands over 3 decades, his heart peaceful and secure. He didn't know that at that same moment, The shredder in Mark's office had just devoured a fresh scrap of paper. On it was written a fourth line, lighter than the previous 3, yet heavier than any. Step 4. Let him destroy himself. The shredder quietly swallowed the final stroke. Night fell. The city was about to enter its longest winter, and spring would not come for a very long time. The loss control plan Walter approved landed on Mark's desk 3 days later. It was simple: redesign the daily clearing process for the 5 busiest stores, optimize discounts for soon-to-expire goods, and introduce stricter inventory audits. Walter's note made it clear: Mark would lead, with finance support, and produce pilot data within a month. For someone who had been on the job less than a year, this was extraordinary. On the day he got the notice, Mark did 2 things. First, he spent the whole afternoon breaking down the plan, adding a 5-page supplement with details, temperature monitoring intervals for each store's coolers, discount trigger thresholds for each category. Second, he took this supplement to Walter's office and humbly asked, "Sir, since loss control involves both procurement and finance, could I have a specific finance contact to coordinate with? Not a dedicated position, just someone to exchange data with." He spoke vaguely, his tone low, as if afraid to inconvenience anyone. Walter looked up and smiled. "Sure, talk to Finance Director Morris. Tell him I approved it, and he'll assign you a liaison." Mark bowed out, and the moment the door clicked shut, his smile was perfectly measured, respectful, reserved, tinged with grateful surprise. That afternoon, he headed to the finance department. It was on the east wing, separated by a glass corridor. When Mark pushed through the glass door, the afternoon sun flooded the open-plan office, reflecting off monitor screens. Keys clattered like rain. He scanned the room and his eyes landed precisely on a woman in the corner, her hair in a low ponytail, wearing thin-rimmed glasses. Lena Carter, chief accountant, 35, 7 years with the company, recruited by Walter from a Big 4 firm. Her professional skills were legendary, her personality, equally notorious, cool, aloof, never joining office parties or discussing personal matters. Mark walked to her desk and inclined his head. "Miss Carter, I'm Mark. Mr. Bennett sent me to coordinate on the loss control pilot." Lena looked up from her spreadsheets, her gaze sweeping over him, cool, appraising, like evaluating data. "Morris told me," she said, closing a folder. "What data do you need?" "Monthly purchase prices, weekly loss rates per store, and," Mark paused, lowering his voice slightly, "the return and credit records from finance, if possible." Lena's eyes lingered on him an extra second. "Return credits?" she asked. "That's not in the plan." Mark gave a slight, self-deprecating smile, as if caught overstepping. "I was thinking, return records often hide the gap between actual loss and book loss. Comparing them might uncover hidden leaks. But of course, if that's confidential, I'll work with what I have." He made it sound casual, even apologetic, as if acknowledging his own impertinence. Yet every word was perfectly aimed at Lena's professional mindset. He knew what data mattered, he understood blind spots in financial workflows, and he even gave her an easy way out. Lena was quiet for a moment. "Wait here." She turned and pulled a folder from the filing cabinet, flipped through it, and handed it over. A summary of return credits, anonymized, no supplier names. "Take a look, and if you need more, come back." Mark took it with both hands, thanked her, and left. After 3 steps, he turned back. "By the way, Miss Carter, I'll be working overtime this weekend. If any data needs correction, feel free to reach out. My phone is on 24/7. He didn't linger, and walked away. Lena watched his figure disappear through the glass corridor, then glanced at the folder he had just handled. She tapped it absently with her finger, then shrugged and returned to her work. But she didn't know that night, Mark lay on his bed in his rental apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the day. When Lena handed him the report, her right ring finger curled slightly, a reflex when handing over something she wasn't fully comfortable giving. That told him she had reservations but didn't think the data was critical. More importantly, she never asked why he wanted it, meaning she wasn't suspicious of internal power shifts, she only cared about procedural propriety. Cautious, but not suspicious. Professional, but not defensive. Mark rolled over, pulled out his phone, and added a line to his encrypted memo, finance entry point confirmed. First contact, safe. He turned off his phone, smiling faintly in the dark. Over the weekend, Mark indeed worked overtime. He occupied a corner of the conference room, refining the loss control model 4 times over. While getting coffee, he ran into old-timer Tom. Tom was the warehouse supervisor, who had been with Walter since the first tiny store. Now in his 50s, grey-haired, his hands calloused like armor. He saw Mark and stopped. "Working weekends, kid?" "Hey, Uncle Tom," Mark said warmly. "I want to finish this plan over the weekend, so Mr. Bennett can see it Monday." Tom peered at Mark's screen, full of charts and figures, and whistled. "Young man works hard. Most assistants I've seen don't show up on weekends." Mark shook his head with a smile. "I don't have family ties, so it's just me anyway. Besides, Mr. Bennett has given me so many chances, I can't let him down." He said this with downcast eyes, his tone plain and sincere, as if it were the most natural thing. Tom looked at him and felt a pang of admiration. This kid was far more reliable than his own video game-obsessed nephew. "All right, you work," Tom patted his shoulder. "When you're done, I'll take you for a late-night snack." "Thanks, Uncle Tom." After Tom's cart disappeared, Mark's smile stayed fixed, but his eyes turned cold. He quickly jotted a note in his book. "Tom, warehouse side, high grassroots trust, can be cultivated long-term. Decision influence, low. Information value, medium." He closed the notebook and continued typing, data flowing through his fingers, each number broken down, reorganized, assigned. At 3 a.m., he finished the model. Stretching, he walked to the window and looked down at the empty parking lot. A lone street lamp cast a long shadow across the ground. Suddenly he remembered something, pulled out his phone, and texted the unlisted number. "Finance contact Lena, initial pass. Information channel +1. Meet next week, new accounting angle. Send. Delete." He pocketed the phone, sat back at the computer, and drafted a respectful work email to Walter, attaching the full plan, copying finance and operations. The last line read, "Thank you for your trust and guidance, Mr. Bennett. I will give it my all and not let you down. Send." He closed the laptop, leaned back, and closed his eyes. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. In the dark, he let out a short, cold laugh, like a blade scraping glass. Monday morning, Walter presented Mark's plan in a meeting with operations and managers couldn't fault it. Walter closed the presentation and didn't hide his satisfaction. He looked around the table and said slowly, "Everyone, I've said it before, Mark is my protégé. You've seen what he can do in less than a year. That means he's dedicated, and he's worth developing. From now on, give him your full cooperation. Don't hold him back just because of seniority." Polite applause rippled. A few old-timers exchanged glances, their expressions mixed. Mark sat slightly behind Walter, head down, wearing a modest shyness, as if embarrassed by the praise. After the meeting, Walter kept Mark back. "Sit." Walter gestured to the chair opposite and personally poured Mark a cup of tea, which Mark accepted with both hands, flustered. Walter took a sip of his tea and said slowly, "The plan is good. But I didn't keep you here to compliment you. I have one question, and I want the truth." Mark sat up straight. "Of course, sir." Walter held his gaze, his eyes sharp. "The return credit data you used, where did you get it? I don't recall authorizing you to access finance's internal records." The air grew tense. Mark's Adam's apple moved, his palms sweating. He knew this was a trap. Walter was testing both his independence and his honesty. If he lied and claimed he had inferred the data, Walter had likely already checked with Lena. But if he admitted it? "Yes," Mark said, lowering his head with a nervous tremor. "I asked Ms. Carter for the return credit summary. I thought the plan would need that to be persuasive, and I didn't want to bother you beforehand." I'm sorry, sir, I overstepped. He put down his teacup and placed his hands on his knees, awaiting reprimand. Walter watched him for a long moment. Then he laughed, wrinkles deepening around his eyes, and patted Mark's shoulder. You're bold, but you get things done. And you own up to mistakes, which is more than I can say for some. He turned serious. Next time you need cross-departmental data, let me know first. Not because I don't trust you, but because I don't want you stepping on a landmine. Understood. Mark nodded firmly, eyes reddening again. Understood. Thank you, sir. Walter waved him out. Once the door closed, he leaned back, tapping his fingers on the desk, and muttered with a smile, bold, smart, and honest. Not bad at all. What he didn't see was that the moment Mark stepped out, the tension in his spine melted away. He took a deep breath, and a faint, icy smile curled at his lips. He had passed. The first unauthorized access test, cleared. Walter's words meant, from now on, tell me what you're doing, and I'll have your back. That was more valuable than any formal permission. It meant Walter now saw him as one of his own. One of his own. Mark tasted the words as he walked to the restroom, turned on the cold water, and splashed his face. In the mirror, the face was calm, the eyes clear, and he silently grinned. Then he dried off and walked out with his habitual gentle expression. That afternoon, Lena received an email from Mark, a formal, polite thank you note, with the loss control framework attached, and a special note, financial data support provided by Ms. Lena Carter. Special thanks. Lena replied with a curt you're welcome, but after closing the email, she opened the framework again, glancing through it. The logic was clean, even more professional than she had expected. She picked up her coffee, looked toward Mark's desk. The young man was typing away, occasionally smiling at a colleague, polite but not overly familiar. Interesting, she thought to herself, and went back to her spreadsheets. She didn't know that the interesting young man was not typing work documents. Mark was updating an encrypted file, a psychological profile of all senior executives. He wrote in detail. Director Wilson, operations vain, loves grand gestures, vulnerable to public flattery. Can be cultivated with praise at business banquets. Weakness, small kickback incident from last year's store renovation, not to be used yet, keeper's leverage. Manager Taylor, regional conservative, data-driven, absolutely loyal to Walter. Low cost benefit for co-option. Strategy, avoid, bypass. Finance Director Morris, nearing retirement, mentally checked out, wants a smooth exit. Can use his apathy to go around him to Lena. He saved, encrypted, and archived the file under the cover name loss_pilot_backup_v3. He shut down his computer. The sun was setting, painting the office building orange. Mark stood up, walked to the window, and looked down at the traffic below. 5 more years, he told himself. In 5 years, everyone in this building, including the man on the top floor who saw him as a son, would be unable to ignore him, unable to shake him off. He didn't want money, money was just a tool. He wanted to stand where Walter stood, looking over the same streets, commanding the same reverence, but higher, steadier, unshakable. And Walter would one day suddenly realize that the sapling he raised had sent its roots silently through the foundation, overrunning the entire garden. By the time he noticed, the whole estate would be in Mark's grip. Mark pulled his gaze away, grabbed his jacket, and walked out at a leisurely pace. Passing the reception, he nodded cheerfully to the security guard. Mr. Jong, working the weekend too? The guard smiled back. You too, Mark, working late. Part of the job, Mark said, and walked out into the night. The autumn wind had turned cold. He walked along the well-lit street, then turned into a dark alley, where a nondescript grey sedan waited. He got into the back seat. In the front sat a man in a baseball cap, face hidden. What did you find? Mark asked softly. Lena's background, the man said, handing over a manila envelope. Her husband's business failed 2 years ago. They still owe close to $200,000, she's paying it off slowly. On the surface she seems fine, but half her paycheck goes to debt. She's under serious financial strain. Mark took the envelope, didn't open it, just felt its thickness and smiled slightly. 200,000, he repeated softly, as if savoring the number. Enough. He had the car drive out of the alley, merging into city traffic. Under the same sky, Walter and Winnie were having dinner. Winnie ladled him soup and asked casually, "How was Mark today?" Walter took a sip, his eyes crinkling. "Good. Really good." Winnie smiled, seeing his bright expression, and said nothing more. But when she reached for a dish, her chopsticks paused briefly at the plate's edge, as if she wanted to say something but held back. Outside, a cold moon hung. No one saw the countless spider-thin strands silently weaving in the moonlight, forming a net that would trap everyone. The weaver, at that moment, sat in the grey sedan, tearing open the envelope under a street lamp. He read Lena's debt record and smiled. The first domino had fallen. The celebration banquet was held at the city's top revolving restaurant. The entire floor was booked. Crystal chandeliers cast light on dark marble floors, reflecting shifting silhouettes in evening wear. Waiters carried silver trays, champagne bubbles burst gently in the glasses, and a string quartet played, creating a luxurious atmosphere that made people unconsciously straighten their backs. Walter stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city lights. His 30 years of conquest were now condensed into this sea of brilliance. He glanced sideways at Mark, who was surrounded by shareholders. The young man wore a well-tailored charcoal suit, held his glass with steady ease, and smiled with just the right warmth, neither ostentatious nor timid. 3 months ago, Mark was a nobody in a job fair, his shirt cuffs frayed. Now he stood in the city's highest social circle, chatting effortlessly with millionaire business titans. Walter felt a strange warmth in his chest, softer and more private than mere pride, like a craftsman watching his carefully polished work finally glow with luster. He leaned to his old friend and shareholder, Harris, and said quietly, "See that? In 3 years, that kid will be a big name." Harris followed his gaze and smiled. "You're really invested." "He's the only one I have," Walter said lightly, but with unshakable certainty. Harris said nothing more, just clinked his glass against Walter's. Halfway through the gala, it was time for Walter's speech. He set down his glass, straightened his tie, and stepped onto the stage. The spotlight followed him, and the room hushed, hundreds of eyes on him alone. Walter stood at the microphone, scanning the crowd. Familiar faces, supplier representatives who had worked with him for 20 years, founding shareholders who weathered the hardest times, long-time employees who never left, and the new ambitious young managers. Among them all, his gaze finally rested on Mark. Mark sat at the table nearest the stage, hands on his knees, looking up with pure, focused reverence. Walter cleared his throat and began. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're here ostensibly to celebrate a record-breaking quarter. But I'll be honest, I'm not just happy about the numbers on the report." A ripple of laughter. "I'm happy because at 48, I can finally say this, my life's work has a successor." Silence. Walter's voice wasn't loud, but it carried the steady weight of experience. He looked toward Mark, his voice softening. 30 years ago, I sold things on the street, my hands cracked and bleeding in winter, barely earning enough for a bowl of soup. I never thought I would stand here with all this. But I never thought either, that when I'm nearly 50, fate would give me a child. His voice softened further at the word child. A few people in the audience were visibly moved. "Mark, stand up." Mark looked startled, then rose quickly, flustered, his face flushed under the lights, as if caught off guard. Walter walked to the edge of the stage and looked straight at him. "Today, I say this to everyone here, my supermarket empire, everything I've built in 30 years, when I retire, all of it goes to you. You are my only heir. The future helmsman of this company is you." For 2 seconds, silence. Then thunderous applause. Champagne glasses rose, bubbles glinting gold in the lights. Everyone turned to Mark, some congratulatory, some envious, some evaluating, some with barely hidden jealousy. But all eyes were on his young face. Mark stood frozen, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Then slowly, he bent his knees and, in front of hundreds of business figures, shareholders, partners, and employees, knelt on both knees. He bowed deep, his forehead almost touching the floor. His shoulders trembled, his back curving in a posture of profound humility. When he raised his head, tears streamed down his face, dripping onto his custom suit. "Sir," his voice broke, raw and shaky. "I, Mark, had no parents, no one cared if I lived or died. You gave me food, a home, a decent job, and now you're giving me your life's work. He couldn't continue, wiping his face roughly with his sleeve. Then he knelt upright and knocked his forehead on the marble floor with a dull thud. "In this life, and the next, and every life, I will be loyal and grateful. I will serve you, protect you, repay you. I will never betray you, never break your trust. If I do, may I be struck by lightning and die a dog's death." His voice wasn't loud, but every word hit the silence. The room was utterly still. Some turned away to wipe their eyes, others applauded fervently, and some raised their phones to capture the moment, ready to share with industry circles. Walter stepped off the stage, quickly walked to Mark, and bent to help him up. His own eyes were red, his voice thick. "Get up. A man's knees are precious, you've knelt to me once, that's enough." As Mark rose, he was still trembling, tears hanging on his lashes. Walter patted his back gently. "All right, today is a happy day. No more tears." Mark nodded, wiped his face again, and managed a tearful smile so pure it was painful to witness. The quartet resumed, lights swirled, the banquet went on. Mark was surrounded by well-wishers, each offering congratulations. "Well done, boundless future. Mr. Bennett has great judgment." He responded politely, clinking glasses, his smile restrained and proper. But no one noticed that when he tilted his head to drink, something cold and almost cruel flickered in his tear-soaked eyes. At 1 a.m., the banquet ended. Mark returned to his rental apartment. He didn't turn on the lights, just sat in the dark, pressing the home button on his phone. Its glow illuminated his face, no trace of emotion, no tears, just an emptiness so complete it was almost serene. He opened an encrypted memo and typed today's date, then a line. * publicly established heir status. Shareholders, suppliers, employees, management all informed. Next step, infiltrate procurement and finance dual channels. Target, full control of core links within 2 years. After a pause, he added, kneeling hurt my knees a bit. Worth it. He locked the phone and tossed it aside. In the dark, he leaned back into the sofa, hearing echoes of applause and glasses, and Walter's firm tone, "All of it goes to you." A faint smile crossed his lips in the darkness, so slight, like a crack on water, here and gone. He stood, pulled open the curtains, and moonlight flooded in. He looked at his hands, long, clean fingers, pale blue in the moonlight. He slowly clenched his fist until his knuckles cracked. "Struck by lightning, die a dog's death," he whispered, repeating his own oath, then laughed quietly. The laughter vanished quickly into the night. He went to the bathroom and turned on the cold water. Splashing his face, he looked at the wet reflection and murmured, "I don't even believe in fate. Why would I believe a curse?" He shut the water, dried his face, and went to bed. Before lying down, he retrieved an envelope from a hidden drawer, a business card slipped to him after the banquet by a supplier representative, with a phone number written on the back, and a single line, "Let's chat alone sometime. Good cooperation opportunities." He studied it briefly, then tucked it into another hidden compartment and turned off the light. His breathing soon steadied, as if he were just any normal, exhausted young man falling asleep. Meanwhile, Walter was still awake, sitting in his study, scrolling through the banquet photos. Winnie brought him a glass of warm milk. "Still looking?" she asked softly. Walter looked up, beaming, and patted the seat beside him. "Look at this." When Mark knelt, so many people cried. "Don't you think he just tugs at your heart?" Winnie glanced at the screen, a young man on his knees, tear-streaked face upturned toward Walter. She paused, then said, "He seems genuine." Walter nodded. "I've decided. Starting next year, he'll take on more procurement responsibilities. After a year, if all goes well, he'll have access to the general ledger." Winnie's fingers tightened slightly on the milk glass, as if she wanted to say something. "What?" Walter noticed her hesitation. She shook her head. "Nothing. You know best. I trust your judgment." She left the study, closing the door softly. But she stood outside for a moment, looking at the wall of family photos, only her and Walter, smiling in different eras, backgrounds shifting from a tiny shop to luxury resorts, but never adding another face. She sighed softly and headed upstairs. In the study, Walter continued flipping through photos. He stopped at one of Mark shaking hands with shareholders, enlarged it, studying Mark's expression, smiling, sincere, slightly bowed, perfectly humble. He stared for a long time, then closed the screen with satisfaction. "Good boy," he muttered, finishing his milk, and went to bed. But the good boy he had raised lay in his apartment miles away, dreaming a very different dream. No gratitude, no kneeling, no tears. Only a vast, glittering commercial empire, his alone, rising at the city's heart. He stood on its roof, looking down at the tiny masses below. Among them, a vague figure with graying hair and a stooped back looked up at him. That figure opened its mouth, as if calling to him. But the wind was too strong, scattering the sounds. Mark turned his back on that figure and walked into his throne. He did not look back. The success of the loss control pilot gave Mark more than just a good performance record. At the quarterly review, Walter announced that Procurement Data Review Authority would be transferred to Mark ostensibly to help optimize costs, but in reality, giving Mark unfettered access to all supplier quotes, unit prices, and inventory records. Procurement Director Frank heard the news and his face froze for an instant, then recovered a professional smile. He was a veteran Walter had hired a decade ago from a competitor, with deep experience and his own network. To open procurement data to a newbie, in his view, it was inviting a wolf into the henhouse. But Walter's word was law. He patted Mark's shoulder and said to Frank, "Mark is handling cost control, give him full access. Cooperate, and your annual bonus doubles this year." Frank could only nod. Mark kept his head down, murmuring, "Looking forward to your guidance, Director Frank," his posture humble, like a newly sprouted seedling. But the minute he was back at his desk, he used his new access to export 2 years of supplier pricing records, rebate rates, and contract renewal dates into his private encrypted database. He sat and scanned them, line by line, making mental notes. Occasionally his fingers paused, connecting certain data points. He noticed an interesting pattern. One paper supplier had adjusted prices 7 times over 2 years, and 3 of those adjustments fell in the same week that Walter renegotiated contracts. In other words, the supplier would raise prices before each renewal, then concede a discount, making Walter feel he'd gotten a win. Mark stared at that pattern for a long time, then smiled. He texted the unlisted number, "Investigate the real owner of Huasheng paper. Full chain of related companies. ASAP." He put his phone face down and returned to the data. He was like a nocturnal predator, mapping the boundaries of its prey's territory, every crack in the fence a future entry point. As for Lena, he decided to let her simmer. Not abandon, just wait. Wait for her to come to him. Sure enough, a week later, Lena happened to run into Mark in the break room. She held her coffee and casually discussed the loss control data, then let the conversation drift. "You've been working late every day, busy?" Mark smiled. "Just habit. I have no one waiting at home anyway, so I might as well stay." Lena's fingers tightened on her cup, Mark noticed, but pretended not to. "Alone?" she asked. "Didn't you buy a place?" "Empty," Mark said, lowering his gaze with a hint of melancholy. "No family left. A big house with just me, what's the point?" This was calculated, evoking Lena's own situation. He had learned her husband, 2 years ago, had separated from her due to debt, though they were still legally married. She lived alone, paying the mortgage and half the debt, coming and going early and late, just as solitary as Mark's alone. Lena was silent. She didn't leave, though. They stood together by the break room window, looking out at the grey sky. After half a minute, she said, "Ever feel this city is huge, but there's almost no one you can really talk to?" Mark turned to her, his gaze warm. "Yes. That's why I'm so grateful to Mr. Bennett, he's the only one I can talk to." He deliberately tied himself to Walter, making her sense a kinship, both of them dependent on the same man's trust. That common ground was more disarming than any direct overture. Lena nodded, said nothing more, and walked away. Mark stayed, watching her retreat, silently counting. Third encounter, first personal topic. Progress faster than expected. He finished his coffee, rinsed the cup, and returned to his desk, his face smooth, no one would detect what lay beneath. 3 days later, a rainy night. Late autumn rain was cold and heavy, drumming against the glass. Most staff had left long ago, only a few lights remained on in the office. Mark sat at his station, face lit by the monitor. He waited. He knew Lena was also working late. He deliberately stayed. At 9:40, he heard a chair push back at the end of the hall, then footsteps, quicker than usual, with urgent rhythm. Mark looked up as Lena appeared, phone clutched in her hand, face tense, lips pressed thin. She paused by his desk, as if something was on her mind. Mark didn't speak first, just raised his eyebrows in gentle inquiry. Lena stood before him for 5 seconds, rain pounding against the windows, enclosing them in a muffled solitude. "Mark," she finally said, her voice low. "That offer you mentioned about financial coordination for the loss control pilot, is it still open?" Mark felt a faint, cold click inside, like a lock springing open. But his expression remained merely curious. "Of course. What do you need, Ms. Carter?" Lena's knuckles were white on her phone. She bit her lip, her eyes searching his face one last time. Then she stepped closer and whispered, "Not work-related. Something else." Mark set down his pen and sat upright, his look turning serious and attentive. "Tell me. If there's anything I can do, I'll help." He used help instead of coordinate, a subtle shift from business to personal. Lena closed her eyes, as if finally resolved, and showed him a page on her phone, a bank overdue notice. Not large, under 30,000, but marked overdue greater than 90 days, legal proceedings will begin. "My husband's business debt," she said, her voice tight with forced calm. "I've paid most of it off, but this one's late. If it's not cleared by next month, the bank will sue. My credit will be ruined. If the company finds out their CFO has a personal lawsuit, I'll lose my job." She didn't finish. Mark looked at the screen in silence for a moment, then met her eyes with a look of genuine sympathy. 30,000, he said softly. "You've carried this alone all this time, that's not easy." Lena's eyes reddened, and she turned her face away, pressing a knuckle to her brow. Mark didn't offer a solution immediately. He knew that any proposal would seem too premeditated. He needed her to feel she was trusting a good person in desperation. So he said just 2 things. First, "I won't tell anyone. You can trust me." Second, "I have access to some channels, maybe I can help. But it will take a little time." He was vague enough to give hope, yet retain deniability if she changed her mind. Lena looked at him for a long time. Rain streaked the glass, city lights blurred beyond. Finally, she tucked her phone away and murmured, "Thank you, Mark." That thank you carried a hint of surrender she probably didn't fully realize. Mark shook his head gently. "Don't mention it. We're colleagues, we look out for each other." He stood and went to the break room to get her a cup of hot water, careful not to touch her fingers as he handed it over. She took it, and the trembling in her fingertips eased. "It's raining hard," Mark said. "Let me walk you to the parking garage, the lighting is bad down there." Lena hesitated a second, then nodded. They walked to the elevator, Mark half a step behind. When the doors closed, the metal walls reflected 2 figures, a weary, tense middle-aged woman and a mild, considerate young man. The floor numbers descended, and at the bottom, Mark held the door for her. Lena turned back at the elevator exit, her lips parting, but no words came. Mark didn't need her to speak. He knew that after that night, Lena wouldn't sleep. She would replay every word, regret, panic, try to rebuild her walls. But those walls were thin against despair. Soon, a week or two at most, she would come back. And when she did, Mark would hand her the rope. A rope she would know might be a snake, but one she had to grab. Mark watched her taillights dissolve into the rain, then took the elevator back up. In the dark, he made a simple calculation. 30,000. Just right, not so large that its origin would be questioned, not so small that she wouldn't risk it. It was a precisely calibrated key. He texted the man in the cap, prepare 30 grand in cash, split into 3 transfers. Set up the routing this week. Discretion first. Then he put away his phone, returned to his desk, shut down his computer, and grabbed his coat. He stood alone in the dark office, rain blurring the windows into a vast, watery glow. He remembered Walter's words earlier that day. Mark, look at this city, it's all ours. And one day, it'll all be yours. In the empty dark, Mark smiled widely. The rain drummed on, and he took a taxi home, closing his eyes in the back seat. Across town, Walter lay in bed, tossing, his shoulder aching. Winnie woke and rubbed his shoulder. What's wrong? Old injury, he muttered. Maybe caught a chill. Winnie turned on the light, checked his face, pale, a sheen of sweat. She put a pain patch on him and gave him water. See a doctor tomorrow, she said. Don't keep putting it off. He nodded, drank, and lay back. The patch warmed his shoulder, and slowly the pain eased. He closed his eyes, replaying the day's scenes, Mark's fluent presentation, Lena typing at her desk, a new price adjustment notice from a supplier. Familiar, busy, controlled his world. He sank into sleep within that comforting noise. He didn't know that beneath the same sky, someone was using his keys to open doors he didn't know existed. Behind those doors lay a fortress he thought unbreachable. Rain washed the city clean. But some seeds only sprout after rain. 2 weeks later, Lena's phone buzzed with a bank notification. Amount, exactly 10,000. Sender encrypted, no memo. She stared at the screen for 2 full minutes, her breathing shallow. She looked through the glass partition at Mark, who was talking to a colleague, holding a file, his usual gentle smile in place. He didn't glance her way. But Lena knew who sent that money. She bit her lip, turned the phone over, and inhaled deeply. Her palms were cold. She went to the restroom, splashed cold water on her face, and looked at herself in the mirror, dark circles, deeper lines. 7 years of flawless service, and now a late loan was forcing her hand. 2 voices warred inside, don't take it, you can't go back. And you have no choice, the bank sues, your credit is ruined, you lose this job. She looked at her red, dry eyes and whispered, just this once. Pay off that debt and stop. But deep down she knew it was a lie to help her sleep tonight. She dried her face, reapplied makeup, and walked back to her desk. Passing Mark, she didn't look at him, but she caught from the corner of her eye that he was typing, expression unaffected. That evening, Mark added to his encrypted memo, Lena, first payment confirmed. No negative reaction, no avoidance. Psychological threshold crossed. Next, data exchange. He thought a moment, added, initial cost, 10K. Expected ROI within 1 month. He locked the screen, packed up, and left. Stopping by Lena's desk, he said casually, leaving now, Miss Carter. You should head home too. She looked up with a strained smile. Yeah. Take care. He nodded and walked to the elevator. As the doors closed, he glanced at his watch, 6:17 p.m. The night was already dark. Outside, the cold wind hit him. He hailed a taxi, then made an encrypted call. Huasheng Paper's ownership chain, done? The gravelly voice replied, done. Layers of shell companies, but ultimate beneficiary is your procurement director, Frank's brother-in-law. Mark stood under a streetlight, his smile slow. Interesting, he said softly. Send me the complete structure with timeline. He hung up and merged into the rush hour crowd. No one noticed this well-dressed young man, calmly calculating his next move. 3 days later, the monthly paper order came. Mark proposed a price review of Huasheng paper under the loss control banner. He prepared a comparison with 3 other suppliers, showing Huasheng's price was about 200 per ton higher. He took this to Frank. "Director Frank," he said deferentially, "I found this Huasheng is about 200 per ton above market. Over the year, that's about 200,000 extra. I'm not saying we should drop them, I know they're a long-term partner, but maybe we can use this comparison to negotiate a lower rate next quarter. The savings would boost our department's performance." He framed it as helping procurement shine. Frank glanced at the sheet, his brow furrowing then relaxing. He knew about the premium, it was the annual kickback to him. Mark couldn't possibly know. But rejecting the proposal would look suspicious. Frank nodded. "All right, draft a negotiation plan. We'll talk to them next quarter. Any savings will count toward your pilot." Mark thanked him and left. Back at his desk, he added a note. "Frank raised no objection to Huasheng premium implies kickback exists. Keep comparison sheet as leverage. Not using yet." Then he opened a new file and executed his real plan. He contacted Huasheng's sales manager not via company lines, but through a private contact from the cap man. Posing as an independent consultant, he said, "I'm assessing your competitive position in Bennett's system. Your current price is above market, and I'm aware of the kickback flows. If you don't want to get caught in the next audit, I suggest lowering your bid to market level. I can help make it look like a voluntary concession." The sales manager was silent for a while, then muttered, "I'll consider it." 3 days later, Huasheng submitted a new quote, 300 per ton lower, more than Mark's proposed 200. Frank was surprised but pleased, and approved it. That evening, Mark's encrypted memo recorded a new number. First return, 5,700. That was Huasheng's consulting fee paid to Mark's anonymous account. Small enough to avoid detection, but it was his first real blood, his own hand cutting a piece from Walter's legacy. He stared at that number for a long time. 5,700 peanuts compared to what he would take. But it was like the first ink stroke on blank paper. Once started, the picture would never stop. He closed his laptop, lay in the dark, and saw Walter's face smiling under the banquet lights, saying "all of it goes to you," patting his shoulder in the office saying "good boy," in a hospital bed. Mark froze. He remembered hearing that Walter had gone to the hospital with shoulder pain. A flicker of alarm. He reached for his phone and called. It rang twice. Walter's voice was tired but cheerful. "Mark? It's late. Sir, I heard you went to the hospital, are you okay? Should I come see you tomorrow?" Walter laughed. "Just old wear and tear. The doctor says rest, less sitting. Don't neglect the loss control work." Mark pressed with concern, but Walter waved it off. Then, as he was about to hang up, Walter added, "Tomorrow I'll have Winnie send some documents to the office, you can handle some routine approvals for me. Large ones still need my okay, but anything under 10,000, you can sign on my behalf." Mark's heart leaped, but his voice stayed steady. "Of course, sir. Rest well, I'll handle things here." He lay in the dark, his pulse strong and steady. Signing authority, even for small amounts, meant he finally had a channel to bypass Walter's eyes. He turned his face into the pillow and smiled soundlessly. The moon was half-clouded, city lights glimmered far off. Most people slept, dreaming that tomorrow would be like today. Only one person knew that tomorrow, everything changed. In the hospital room, Walter hung up and put his phone aside. Winnie was peeling an apple, slicing it into chunks. "Mark called," she asked. "Yeah, asking about me, offering to handle paperwork." Walter smiled. "Isn't he thoughtful?" Winnie said nothing, just cleaned the peeler, put it away, and tucked the blanket around him. "Don't overdo it. Delegate what you can." Walter closed his eyes, nodding. "With Mark, I can breathe a little easier." Wind tapped the window, Winnie drew the curtains. She looked back, Walter was already asleep, breathing deeply, a faint smile lingering. She sat by the bed for a long time. Watching his peaceful face, she recalled Mark's eager concern on the phone. She couldn't pinpoint her unease, maybe intuition, maybe years of hard-won vigilance. She felt something growing outside, like vines creeping up the walls, tightening silently. She shook it off, turned off the light, and murmured, "I hope I'm wrong." No one answered. Across town, Mark had reopened his laptop. Its blue glow lit his face as he created a new encrypted folder. He typed, "Foundation." Inside, the first document, Walter's illness acting authority records. He began writing, dates, scope, maneuverable space, risk assessment. He wrote slowly, weighing every word, like an architect calibrating load-bearing beams. At 2 a.m., he finished. Saved. Encrypted. Closed. He sat for 3 minutes, mentally reviewing the night's events, no gaps, no traces. Then he stood, pulled open the curtains. The clouds had parted, moonlight spilled in. Mark looked at his open hands, clean, nimble, unscarred. He clenched them slowly, then relaxed. And he whispered 2 words. Begin. Walter's first week at home was quiet. Winnie turned the study into a temporary office, papers arrived daily, and she made her special herbal tea. Walter, wearing reading glasses, reviewed documents by the window, occasionally looking up at the bare sycamore trees outside. Days moved slowly. Mark called every evening, reporting succinctly. Walter listened to the calm, steady voice, reassured. "Sir, we renewed 3 supplier contracts today, saved $63,000 against budget. I emailed the details." "Good, I'll look later." Walter rubbed his nose. "Well done. Sir, are you feeling better? I'll come over tomorrow to bring some documents for your signature." Walter hesitated. He didn't want to trouble the young man, but then agreed, "All right, come for lunch. Winnie will cook." Mark laughed softly, "Great. I'll be there." After hanging up, Walter leaned back, looking at his hands, the veins more visible, skin looser. He turned them over, studying the lines. "Getting old," he chuckled. Winnie came in with soup, hearing him, and patted his head. 48 and calling yourself old? What about people at 60? Walter held her hand. 1 more year with Mark, then I'm done. We'll buy a little seaside house, watch the sunrise every day. No more worries. Winnie smiled, but said nothing. The next day, Mark arrived on time. He wore a grey cashmere sweater and a beige coat, carrying fruit and supplements. He changed shoes neatly, hung his coat, and called out respectfully, "Sir, Aunt Winnie." Winnie poked her head from the kitchen. "Come in, wash your hands. Lunch will be ready soon." Mark went to the study, laid out files on Walter's desk, and sat opposite, giving a clear summary: supplier renewals, store traffic, loss control results. Walter nodded, occasionally asking a question, which Mark answered promptly. After the report, Walter put away his glasses and asked casually, "How's Harris handling the daily work? Does he feel pressured?" Mark's eyes lowered slightly, his tone measured. "Mr. Harris is very responsible, but since he's not familiar with operations, approvals sometimes drag. If I could handle routine small purchases and maintenance approvals, it would ease the load and I'd send you weekly summaries. Maybe raise my approval limit from 10 to 20,000. He immediately added, "Just a suggestion, your call." Walter studied him. Sunlight fell on Mark's face, softening his features. His eyes were clear and earnest, with a hint of deference. After a sip of tea, Walter said, "All right, up to 20,000 you sign. Monthly summary to me. But every transaction must have full documentation and approval chain, no shortcuts." "Got it." Mark stood, nodding firmly. "I understand. I'll keep complete records for your review anytime." Walter smiled, waved him down. Sit. Enough business, we're just having a meal." Mark relaxed, accepted the soup from Winnie, and praised her cooking. Winnie beamed and piled more food on his plate. Lunch was warm and cheerful. Mark helped clean up, washed dishes, and even took out the trash. At the door, Winnie said, "What a considerate boy." Mark smiled back. Take care, Aunt Winnie, it's cold out. Remind Sir to take his medicine on time. She watched him enter the elevator, then closed the door. Back in the living room, Walter was on his phone, smiling. Winnie sat beside him and asked, "How much authority did you give him?" 20,000 for routine approvals, he said, not looking up. She pressed, "He's been here less than a year. 20,000 isn't trivial." Walter set down his phone. "I know. But you saw his results on loss control. And with my health, I need 3 months of rest. Harris doesn't know the business. Mark is the only one who can step in." Winnie seemed to want to argue, but just nodded, "As long as you're sure." She went to the kitchen, and Walter texted Mark, "Good work today. Start tomorrow as discussed. Monthly summary to me." Mark replied instantly, "Got it. Rest well, sir, I've got things covered." Walter smiled, put down the phone, and leaned back, enjoying the warm sun. His shoulder pain had eased. But in his blissful doze, Mark had already returned to the office and raised his approval limit in the system to 20,000. The confirmation flashed green, approval authority updated. Current single transaction cap, 200,000. He stared at it 3 seconds, then logged out and updated his encrypted log, authority expansion to 20K. Operational window, estimated 3 months. He processed a stack of small requisitions, repairs, restocking, office supplies. One caught his eye, a store sign repair, $18,000, from a company he'd never heard of, registered less than 6 months ago. Most would just pass it. But Mark noted it, then signed and filed it away. He didn't need to act now, but he was marking all possible channels like laying traps covered with leaves. Meanwhile, at home, Walter found an old ledger while tidying a drawer. It was from 8 years ago. Handwritten. He almost threw it out, but a number caught his eye. It was a quarterly settlement with a supplier he couldn't recall, but at the bottom he had handwritten, "Rebate reconciliation, document amount versus actual receipt difference equals 1,840. Supplier claimed system error adjusted." He stared at it. $1,800, negligible then. He had accepted the system error and moved on. But now, he recalculated the total after the adjustment. There was still a discrepancy of a few $100s. He frowned. Probably just old data entry issues. But Walter, with his lifetime of numbers, felt a prickle. What if that system error wasn't an error? He put the ledger back, shut the drawer, and tried to focus. But the tiny grain of sand was in his shoe, small enough to ignore, but always there. He walked to the window, watching fallen leaves swirl. He thought of Mark's confident, honest demeanor at lunch, and then of that old discrepancy. There was no connection, yet his mind drew a strange link. He shook it off and went to the kitchen for water. Passing the entryway, he saw the box of supplements Mark had left, fancy packaging labeled Nourish Bones, Relieve Strain. He touched its cool surface, then pulled his hand back. In the kitchen, he asked Winnie an odd question. "Do you think Mark is too perfect?" Winnie turned off the tap. "Isn't perfect good?" "It is," Walter said, taking the water, "but every word and gesture hits just the right note. Nothing extraneous." Winnie was silent, then continued placing cups back on the rack. Walter laughed at himself. "I'm just being paranoid from too much rest." He went back to the study. But behind him, Winnie's hand paused on a cup for 5 seconds. She glanced at the supplement box, her gaze lingering, then finished her task and walked away. No one emptied that grain of sand. And small, overlooked details would one day pile up and crush an entire garden. Mark returned home to his rental. He washed his face, looked in the mirror, young, clean, calm. He checked his phone, no messages. He sat at his desk and recorded 2 things, authority expansion complete, and the old ledger had been discovered. The Capman's sources noted that Walter had spent over 20 minutes reviewing it. Mark stared at that last point. 20 minutes on an 8-year-old ledger. Could be coincidence. Or could be he was looking for something. Mark's fingers tapped the desk. He texted the Capman, "Pull a list of all small suppliers Walter worked with 8 years ago." Check which were dissolved or transferred. Focus on those with book error disputes. He put down the phone and leaned back. 1 grain of sand. Mark knew better than Walter that once a man's intuition was pricked, it would grow like a hairline crack. He had to cover that crack before Walter connected the dots or, better, create a larger, false crack to deflect attention. He smiled faintly. Old fox, he murmured, without anger, only cold, focused interest. The wind outside picked up, rustling dry branches against the glass. He turned off the light and lay down in the dark. At the same moment, Walter turned off his study light and climbed the stairs. His knee twinged, he paused, gripping the rail, and looked down at his own shadow, stretched long by the light behind him. It seemed thinner than before. He shrugged and continued up. Both men, in opposite directions, closed their eyes. One dreamed of a golden, vast kingdom. The other dreamed of a boundless, freezing sea, slowly freezing over. Beneath the surface, the currents were already moving. Winnie opened the old ledger at 2 a.m. She couldn't sleep. Walter's rest was light. Quietly, she went downstairs for water, but passing the study, she noticed a drawer slightly open. She meant to push it closed, but her fingers caught the yellowed paper, and Walter's words echoed, "It's all too precise, every word, every action." She hesitated, then pulled out the ledger. She sat in the corner armchair, turned on the lamp, and found the page Walter had studied. She read the note: rebate reconciliation difference $1,840. Supplier claimed system error. Adjusted. She checked surrounding pages, re-adding the numbers. After the adjustment, there was still a few hundred missing. A pittance, but she knew the supplier's name. Walter had mentioned them once, good people. Then, at some point, the partnership ended. No reason given. Winnie's mind raised a question: how did that relationship end? She put the ledger back, closed the drawer, and went upstairs. Walter's face in the moonlight was peaceful. She touched his hand gently, then lay awake for an hour. At dawn, Mark was already in his office. He had a handwritten list of all small suppliers from 8 years ago, with detailed status. He picked one, registered 10 years ago, dissolved 5 years ago, with a final note: unsettled refund $12,000. More importantly, its owner had once been a sales manager for Walter's biggest competitor. A perfect smoke bomb, it would send investigators down a competitor spy rabbit hole for months, a dead end. He called archives. Find a termination agreement from 8 years ago, I'll email you the supplier name. Get me the original. Then he drafted an anonymous tip to appear later, timed to pull attention away. He moved through his day, signed a $197,000 equipment order, just under his limit, then received Lena's encrypted message. First transfer completed, $520,000, split into 2 batches. Recorded as Hungtone Cold Chain first payment with backup contract. He replied received, deleted the chat, and continued. 52,000, the first real big move. He had laid groundwork for 2 months. Even if audited, the paper trail looked flawless. But the equipment would never arrive. By then, the supplier would be dissolved, and the money would have passed through 3 shell accounts to an offshore false identity. Mark stood by the window, looking at the grey winter city. He thought of Walter home, drinking soup, reading, believing in his successor. He breathed a fog on the glass and drew a circle with an X inside. A passing colleague asked, "What are you drawing?" Mark wiped it off. Nothing. Just bored. Meanwhile, Walter sat at home, the same old discrepancy buzzing in his head. He couldn't stop thinking about those few $100. He couldn't recall whether he had fully investigated. The memory was gone, buried under years of larger issues. But he knew numbers didn't lie. He put down his book and rubbed his temples. Winnie asked, "You okay?" "Just thinking," he said. "Did Mark send files today?" "On your desk." He sighed. The tiny fly still buzzed. That afternoon, Mark left early, bought a box of walnut pastries Walter liked, and texted, "I'll bring the weekly report over tomorrow. You'll get fresh pastries too." Walter smiled and showed Winnie, "See? He insists on coming. The next day, while Mark was away, Winnie prepared food. She paused when Walter said, "He also loves your braised pork, make some." Her hand hovered for a moment, but she said nothing. That evening, Mark worked on his anonymous tip document, polishing it. He stood at his window, looking at the vast city lights. 2 months, he whispered to his reflection. After 2 months, the next batch. His mirrored face was calm, lips slightly curled, no warmth in his eyes. As if he were deciding what to buy for dinner. As if it were all perfectly ordinary.